Hello everybody, my name is Terry Fisher, I'm from NQA, I'm the Principal Assessor for OHS Management Systems. Today we're going to discuss the migration process from OHSAS 18001 to ISO 45001. Can I just check that you can all see my screen and everything's fine? If you have any questions. If you can type your questions into the questions box, then I'll attempt to answer the questions as we go through the presentation. If there's questions on a particular theme or whatever, I'll try and bunch them together. Just be reminded, I can't answer specific individual questions about companies or organisations. I can only give you a general response about the system requirements, about the management system generally. I can't answer specific company or organisation questions that are not related directly to the management system. So, firstly, we'll discuss why implement ISO 45001. There's a migration process for OHSAS 18001. As most of you should be aware, 18001 will not be valid beyond March 2021. The migration period has commenced, seen as ISO 45001 was published in March 2018. There's a 3-year migration process, which we're about halfway through. The big changes in 45001 is that it's adopting an Annex SL structure similar to 14001 2015 and 9001 2015 and all other recently revised management standards within the ISO range. When we look at implementing 45001, we're looking to deliver a culture change based on risk-based thinking and worker engagement, a proactive risk management culture, so a systematic approach with reduced culpability and protection of workers, which is a core value of 45001, as it was with 18. And a proven commitment to demonstrate via leadership commitment and activity the organisation's commitment to protect its workers, to deliver improvement actions and enhance performance over time, with a commitment to continual improvement, which is common across all ISO management standards. The structure of 45001 is based on Annex SL. So the first 3 elements, the scope, the normative references and the terms and definitions, all refer directly to the standard itself. As organisations looking for accreditation to 45001, the application of the standard is contained within sections 4 to 10 inclusive. First questions in. Just a reminder that all registered attendees for the webinar will receive the presentation slides. The presentation is also being recorded, so you can view it via our website if you're unable to attend the full session this afternoon. So all registered recipients will receive the full presentation, and as I say, it will be recorded and available via our website. So just going back to the structure of ISO 45001, As I've said, the first 3 sections refer to the standard, and sections 4 to 10 inclusive are what's applicable to organisations in terms of what you need to do to meet the criteria for registration. This is a common criteria now being used across all the structures of ISO management systems. So 9000, 14000, 27, etc. All recently revised ISO management systems are applying this Annex SL structure. Obviously, within that structure, discipline-specific requirements are applied. So the context of the organisation in relation to OHSMS performance is applicable to 45, environmental 14, quality management 9000, etc. We'll take a brief tour of the chapters, the elements of this standard as we go throughout the presentation. So firstly, let's look at the OHS management system process. What we're looking to achieve is a culture change, an enhancement and an improvement of performance over time, the continual improvement process. Based on the Plan, Do, Check, Act. Section 4, the context of the organisation, is looking at issues external and internal that the organisation needs to meet and address. Its activities, the purpose, its strategic direction are all elements of the context of the organisation. The context also includes interested parties, which as a primary interested party, workers, and I deliberately use the term workers, are a core interested party in the OHS management system. The word worker is used in this standard because it's an all-inclusive term. This standard does not use the phrase employees because workers is all-inclusive, including subcontractors, etc. And they are the core interested party as far as this management system is concerned. So it's a given that workers are an interested party within 45,001. There could be other interested parties, legal, corporate, numerous others, depending on the context of your organisation and what your organisation does. So it's a matter of linking what your organisation does, who's interested in it, who you're trying to protect, what you're trying to deliver, what you're trying to achieve, and making the management system then deliver those needs and benefits as you go throughout the process. The context of the organisation must be considered before you then look at the scope of application. The context is also influenced by the strategic direction of the organisation, what it needs to do, where it wants to be, the resources available, the roles, responsibilities, and the participation. So that's in section 5 of the leadership section of the standard. Section 6 under planning, so we're looking at hazard identification there, risks and opportunities, compliance obligations, and OHS objectives and plans to achieve those objectives. In section 7 and 8, we're looking at resources, the competencies of those resources, the awareness of workers and information, communication, how the organisation communicates, both internally and externally, what it's trying to achieve by that communication, and documented information. So this is a common phrase now used in all of the revised ISO standards, and it doesn't just mean hard copy documents. It means all information, data, and information, and however it's displayed and transmitted and available to individuals and how that's communicated, documented information is a key element for control. Application of the hierarchy of control, looking at the management of change, and looking at the role of procurement, including contractor control, emergency preparedness, and all the operational controls that may be applied to your organisation. And all these controls and needs and resources, etc., will all be impacted on and defined within the context of the organisation, what you're trying to achieve as an organisation and who you're trying to achieve it for, and how you're going to achieve that as you go through the process. Within section 9 and 10 of the management standard, we're looking at internal audits, management review, incidents and corrective actions, improvements, and the improvement process. There's been a lot of changes within the clauses of 45,001 in comparison to 18,001. 18,001 has been a very good foundation, and 45,001 endeavours to build on that and strengthen the applicable requirements for that individual organisation. The revised structure of Annex SL is a very flexible structure, and because it's common across numerous management standards, it also then lends itself to integration with existing management standards such as 9 and 14. So because of that commonality of structure, it tries to reduce the administrative burden that could be placed on organisations. So there's quite a lot of commonality. Only when you've identified the context and the requirements of the context as defined within the standard, and identified the interested parties and looked at the strategic direction and needs of the organisation, can you then define the scope of the management system. And that's a key process. If you don't know what you're trying to achieve, how are you then going to define the scope of the system? That's why the context, workers and leadership are all considered prior to establishing the scope of the management system. If we talk about a little bit about context, and I'll give you some examples here, you know, a water company, a public limited company, an educational establishment, a university, a food manufacturer, a limited company, or a family-owned engineering business, a relatively small enterprise potentially. All these requirements still apply to all those organisations, but the context in which they work, what they're out to achieve, why they're out to achieve it, the resources, the various things, the culture of the organisation can be very different. And all these things must be considered as part of the effective implementation of a management system. The context is a really key element to understand. The context itself is very variable depending on each organisation. So you may have two very similar organisations that do very similar activities. However, I guarantee you that each organisation is unique and it will have its own challenges and its own opportunities, and it will have its own good practice and its own core things, and the way it does things will be its own defined culture. So although it may be doing the same as another organisation just down the road or wherever, I guarantee that every organisation is unique in how it does that, how it applies that to the individuals within that organisation, because 45,001 is primarily about the protection of people. And by protecting its people, it also protects the organisation. So in section 4 of the standard, the context of the organisation looks at understanding the organisation and what it's trying to achieve, understands the needs and expectations of workers and other interested parties. And as I've said, only when that's done can you then determine the scope of the management system and where you need it to apply across your organisation. And then there are some general requirements within section 4 about the management system. There are numerous models that you can apply when considering internal external factors. It's common for pestle analysis and various other models to be used looking at the various factors. So legal, political, economic, social, technological, environmental, looking at systems and strategy and structure of an organisation, skills and staff and culture and shared values of an organisation internally. Both of those things influence what's required to implement an effective OHS management system. So as we talked earlier, ISO 45001 can sit very nicely in an integrated approach to management systems. Obviously, it has a different set of clause requirements based on its particular discipline, but you can see the structure is very much the same. Interested parties, for example, in 45 would include workers, managers, contractors, agency staff, regulators, customers, visitors, public, and numerous others depending on what that organisation was, whether it's part of a group, was it a standalone organisation, as I say, the unique requirements of that particular company or organisation. That's just an example of some of the broad areas that you could identify interested parties. Could include also unions and various other interests. The management system requires us to define the scope, and as I've said before, that is a requirement after you've considered the context. Leadership. There's been various subtle changes in wording in the ISO standard, and obviously there's been various enhancements of requirements and the clause structures. So it's a very different standard than 18,001 in the way it's structured and the terminology that's used and the clause requirements. But the basic principles remain the same. It's about protecting workers and it's about protecting people from occupational health and safety risks. Leadership is used extensively because it's a key element. So the traditional phrase of management has been dropped in 45001 to look at leadership. Leadership may occur at all levels of an organisation, and it also includes the top management of the organisation. They have a key role to play in defining the culture, the direction, the way things operate, the resources available, etc. So leadership is really a key element of 45001, and it was in 18,001 under the terms of management. But like I say, the requirements of leadership in 45 are looking at the operational influence and the various things that leadership can drive within the management system. And it also looks at the commitment and the declaration of that commitment in terms of a policy. The commitment is there for safe and healthy working conditions and the prevention of work-related injury and ill health. So we're not just talking about physical accidents and injury, we're talking about ill health, whether that be mental well-being or physical psychological well-being. All these things are included in the OHS management system. It isn't about just physical accidents. Organisational roles, responsibilities and authorities. These need to be available as documented information, so there needs to be supporting information there for these roles and structures and authorities. People need to understand what is expected of them, what they're authorised to do, what the limits of that authorisation are. And there's a real emphasis in 45001 about consultation and participation of workers. And like I say, the phrase worker is used as an all-inclusive term to include contractors. So it's not just talking about direct employees. It's the protection of workers generally, so which could include agency members, contractors, etc., and the whole remit of that. And it is about that participation and engagement with workers to ensure that an effective management system is implemented and it delivers the benefit that was intended to protect them from injury and ill health. There's requirements for mechanisms of removal of barriers, time and resource, in terms of if you don't give people the time to do the jobs or the activities and the resources, then how that can then lead to issues with regard to potential physical injury, potential mental health issues and psychological issues. So all these things must be considered within the management system. And it's no good doing all that unless that information is communicated and people understand and, as necessary, supported and trained in enabling them to deliver that need within the organisation. The standard also looks at non-managerial participation in the identification of hazards and controls. So the management system isn't something that should just be done to workers because it's addictive from a high level within the organisation. Workers should be encouraged to participate in the activity, and that will need to be demonstrated in the assessment process. But don't forget, managers themselves can also be workers, so therefore they also need protection. So it doesn't exclude managers, but it wants all levels of the organisation to participate in the identification and all elements of the management system as appropriate. And only by doing that will you then get full engagement and an overall effective management system. One of the key areas is the hierarchy of control and looking at risks and opportunities. So wherever there's a risk, there is an opportunity to improve on that risk potentially. So, and the hierarchy of controls is a fundamental method of looking to improve performance. So the elimination of the hazard, risk, substitution for something that's less hazardous, engineering controls, looking at isolating people from the hazard, administrative controls, so that's information, work instructions, etc. And last, at the bottom of that inverted triangle there is PPE. So you can see from that slide, the most effective method is elimination, and then as you slide down that inverted triangle, the controls become less effective in terms of protection. So the starting point, the first question has got to be, can we eliminate that hazard? And then you work down from there. If that's not possible for whatever reason, then can we substitute, can we implement? And that's how the approach has got to be with regard to risk reduction and improvements of performance. The general requirements in section 6 are looking at hazard identification and assessment of risks and opportunities. The standard doesn't specify how that's done. It specifies that you need to assess the risk, you need to have an identification criteria, and what that criteria is must be effective, and it must be effectively applied within your organisation. Also within section 6, there's a determination of legal and other requirements. And this element, as in previous standards, the determination of legal requirements is a different requirement to the evaluation of compliance. We'll talk about that a little later. But obviously there's a requirement there to look at legal and other requirements. So the other requirements could come from non-statutory requirements that the organisation chooses to look at. And then we need to take action and plan actions in relation to delivering those needs and requirements and reducing risk. I've had a question come in. In internal auditing, the actual operational controls may be carried out or unlikely to change due to ISO 45001. That's true. There's a lot of, but that assumes that those controls are effective and actually delivering the benefit. So yes, if the operational controls are there and they're effective, then it's unlikely 45001 will change the operational controls in comparison to 18001. However, as with all standards, there is a requirement to look at the risks, to look at the opportunities, and a need for continual improvement. So it's not just a matter of, oh, well, we've always done it that way. Let's carry on doing it that way. It's always been acceptable. You know, things do change. Culturally, things change. Socially, things change. Technology changes. All these things have an impact on the operations and the operational controls being applied, the needs of the organisation, how busy it is, whether it's working shifts, not shifts, different cultural needs, different organisational needs for individuals within that particular organisation. So it's not a static activity. OHS management is not a, oh, well, we've done all that, let's just put it to bed. It's an integral part of running a business. And the ISO Annex SL structure must be viewed as an overall business management system. So yes, I accept if you've got effective controls, they may not be particularly largely influenced by 45001, but I don't think any organisation stays still. You know, you could get a big order in one day or something, and then, oh, well, how are we going to address this order? How are we going to deliver that order? Oh, we need to work additional hours. We need to put more people on a particular process or a particular activity. All these things happen within organisations on a daily basis as a matter of routine. And it's the way that organisation deals with that. But it must consider, oh, we've changed that, we've put some new people on, etc., etc. So although these are routine things, they still need to be considered and effectively implemented within an organisation, depending on what it does, etc. So the phrase continual improvement springs to mind. Also in section 6 is the requirement for OHS objectives and planning to achieve them. So this is an enhanced requirement, whereas the previous version of the standard in 18 looked at requiring OHS objectives. There also needs to be plans of how to achieve the objectives, and those steps are required within the clauses of 6.2. And they also must be documented and communicated where relevant to the interested parties, etc. Because if you don't communicate what's required, how can that then be achieved? So risk assessment and hazard identification and opportunities for improvement are a principal part of the risk assessment and management system process under the Plan, Do, Check Act, and they can all be influenced and impact on objectives, controls, and review and improvement over time. Leaders of the organisation need to provide the resources and information necessary for the establishment, maintenance and continual improvement of the management system, and that commitment to continual improvement and statutory and other compliance requirements has to be defined in the policy, and the whole management system then is looking about delivering that policy requirement for the protection of workers and how that's controlled going forward. So the resources, information, training all contribute to the resource support activities that are captured in Section 7 of the Management Standard. So within Section 7 there are individual clause requirements looking at resources and competence. So competence also impacts on suppliers and providers because they may not be direct workers. I'll use the example in the UK where a gas engineer needs to be gas safe registered to work on a live gas system, etc. So therefore that competence must be applied. If that's sourced from outside the organisation, you must be aware of what's needed from a compliance point of view, so there's statutory compliance there, and you need to be aware of that before you then appoint an organisation to undertake that activity on your behalf or upon your premises. So you can see one of the things about the management system and the way it's written is, although there are individual clause requirements, it's very important for you to consider other clause requirements. A management system by definition does not work in isolation of each individual clause. It's a system that interacts with other elements of the system and therefore to provide the overall effectiveness thereof. You really have to think about the connectivity, what's happening in procurement, who controls that. Do procurement know that if you want to get a new supplier or they're charged with getting a new supplier for a particular activity, there may be statutory obligations linked to that compliance and that service requirement, etc., etc. Think about how that's controlled within your own organisations. The awareness of workers and individuals, etc., within the organisation. People can't be expected to deliver something if they're not aware of it. Communication obviously is a key element of all of this, and worker participation and communication and leadership and strategy. As I say, communication, as with all organisations, is a key to effective delivery. And documented information, as we spoke earlier, is not just about hard copy documentation. It could be data information, it could be items from external of the organisation available on the web, it could be information from suppliers, etc. Relevant information must be suitably controlled, identified, and be available and retrievable as appropriate to the people within the operational areas. I've got a question on communication. Under 7.4, what is deemed as adequate for an SME? Weekly meetings, toolbox talks, etc. It's about the effectiveness. The only way I can answer that, I can't give specific defined requirements because it'll depend on your own organisation. But it's about the effectiveness of the communications and that participation. So it's about that involvement of workers. Are they involved in hazard identification? How can you demonstrate that? Do you capture hazard reports, etc., from workers? And And it's the whole remit about that communication, which, if it's effective, you'll have lots of evidence that you can show, both in terms of data and performance and various things, to demonstrate that participation, and records and sign-offs and various things. It's all about the effectiveness within your own organization. So I can't say, oh yes, that works. It's about you defining what works for you and being able to demonstrate that it works when the assessor is looking at the management system. Hopefully that's answered that question. So in terms of operational control, the operation needs to plan and implement control and maintain the processes needed to meet the compliance obligation and manage the risks and opportunities effectively. When you look at the actual size of the clauses within this area, it's a relatively small section of the management system in terms of documented text within the standard. But this is the fundamental requirement, because all the rest of the management system requirements are looking at how it impacts on the operational control and the emergency preparedness. It really is important to understand it's about effective operational control, and the activities support that control and delivering the benefit so that people aren't being injured or harmed by the work activity. So like I say, this area is a relatively small area in terms of text, but it is critical. It's a focal point of how that management system delivers the benefit. I'm just scanning through the questions here. Yeah. Just a second. Just having difficulty seeing all the question. Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulty seeing all the questions. Right, I'll move on. So, in terms of performance evaluation, we're looking at operational controls, we're looking at emergency preparedness, we're looking at evaluation of compliance. These are all fundamental requirements of the management system. Companies generally have lots of information and data and records and all sorts of indicators in terms of monitoring and measurement. It's about using those effectively, the management system, whether it be number of accidents, absences, the amount of occupational absence that's been identified within an organisation. All these things need to be monitored and measured to deliver ongoing improvement of the management system. A key element of this monitoring and measurement is evaluation of compliance. So this is confirming that you've identified a compliance requirement, whether that be a statutory compliance or an other requirement under the standard, and you've got to confirm by evaluation that that is being delivered. Do not just assume that because you've got lots of procedural controls or activities, etc., that that compliance requirement is being delivered. There must be a formal mechanism for the evaluation of compliance that must be defined, that must be scheduled, that must be then evidenced on an ongoing basis for the particular requirements that are applicable to the organisation and its interested parties. As I say, statutory compliance is obviously legal compliance and other requirements, but the other requirements could be group, could be external interested parties, such as a union, for example, but there's also then a link to, in the UK, to statutory compliance. So it's about how you then evaluate that, how frequently it's evaluated, and does that confirm that you're actually delivering that compliance as required or as intended. Going back to internal audits are nothing new within management systems. There's a general requirement there, and there obviously needs to be an internal audit program. The internal audit program, as in previous versions of all management system standards for ISO, the internal audit program needs to be based on previous performance, knowledge, data, information. So it isn't just about, oh, well, we've got to cover every clause of the standard and therefore our audit program of January we're going to do this and February we're going to do that. That may be appropriate at the initial migration to confirm that the management system is fully implemented within an organisation. But as a management system matures, internal audits are a very good mechanism using a risk-based approach to look at the internal audit program. Where's all the data and information indicating, have we got problems, what's working well, what isn't working well, and you should focus your resources on appropriate risk. So if you've had a lot of incidents, for example, in a particular area of activity, then it's common sense that you may then use the internal audit program to audit that area more frequently than something that has a lesser or reduced impact on the organisation, or something that's proved that you've never had an issue with that over the last 12, 18 months, 2 years, whatever. So therefore, I'm going to look at that less frequently than something that I know we've got issues, I know we've got incidents, or I know we've just gone through a significant change point in that area, so I will audit that potentially more frequently. So use a risk-based approach to the internal audit program. Don't just use it as a tick box exercise to go through each clause of the standard and just confirm. We also encourage within the ISO standards a process-based approach rather than a procedural approach for internal auditing. So a process-based approach is looking at an area of activity in its entirety and following that round so you get a full overview of that particular one activity rather than just a procedural, which could be quite a restricted view on just one element of an activity. So it's always worth looking at procedural based approach. Also in section 9, as well as the internal audits, you've then got the management system review. I don't think there's anything significantly changed in the principles of management review. The frequency needs to be defined by the organisation, it needs to be planned, it needs to meet the requirements of the inputs and the outputs, and it needs to be delivered, and it needs to be attended by appropriate people, including top leadership, etc., to ensure that the whole organisation is effectively covered by the review. And it needs to be there, you know, it's no good a management review making suggestions that then, because there's no senior leadership team there or no top management there, they can't make decisions. But it doesn't mean to say you've got to get everybody in a room on the second Tuesday or whatever once a year. It's a very flexible standard. Management review can be achieved in a number of ways. It could be that you don't have a traditional meeting as such. You may review information and then circulate that, and then the small working groups, etc. It can be done in numerous ways, and the Annex SL structure is very flexible in terms of accommodating different approaches within an organisation. It's about making sure that the management system is effectively delivering the benefit in terms of policy and objectives and legal compliance, etc., that was intended. And that's the whole purpose of the management review. The general improvement requirements haven't significantly changed, and they are in line with 9 and 14. A general requirement. In 10.2, obviously, it's looking at incidents and non-conformity, corrective action in investigation, root cause, and implementing the actions, and then reviewing the effectiveness of those actions. The requirement for continual improvement in terms of policy commitment and the delivery of that within an effective management system over time can be delivered by terms of process development, objectives, risk reduction, etc. So continual improvement should be a natural output from an effectively implemented management system. And it should be reasonably easy to demonstrate that, where you're looking at revising risk assessments, etc. As you follow the process round, that where risks are reduced, the risk assessment then reflects that risk reduction over time. Performance is improved by the reduction in accidents and incidents and ill health. The actual delivery of objectives and targets, and delivery of plans, the delivery of training, for example. So continual improvement can also include the improvement of skill, knowledge and awareness of workers within an organisation. The thing to remember, it's 45001 is a very flexible standard, as is 9 and 14. It's about delivering what that organisation needs and making that effective for the workers that are impacted by the work activity. So as well as risk and opportunities, we looked at earlier, leadership and where the strategic direction of the business and the requirements of the leadership are another significant influencing factor as to what the organisation does and how it does it. And they're an integral part of the management system. And by leadership, it's more than just appointing managers or whatever. It's actually, ensuring that those things are done effectively, ensuring that adequate resources are provided as appropriate, and or if a certain type of resource isn't available, identifying alternative methods or activities that can eliminate the risk and reduce the hazard. The system is impacted by internal and external issues, the context of the organisation, the needs and expectations of relevant interested parties. And the outputs are satisfaction of compliance obligations and meeting the needs and reducing risk and enhancing OHS performance over time. That's what the management system is trying to deliver. Hopefully that's given you a whistle-stop tour of 45001 and the intended protection of workers as a core activity with that worker engagement and effective leadership and management. NQA provided some documentation to support this migration and the path to the 45001. This is available on our website, for our existing clients, we've also done a gap analysis document that needs to be completed before the migration visit. So this is available. This particular gap analysis is there for everyone to use, but clients only get when they declare to us their intention of going through the migration and identify a time scale. Then we will send them out and we get that time, they get that scheduled visit in, and then at that point we issue them with a gap analysis document that takes them through to help them checkpoint all the various requirements of 45,001 to ensure that they've got something in the system to meet the needs of that requirement prior to the migration assessment. Practical tips. If you're starting from scratch, it may seem obvious. Read the standard, have a copy available to you. It is available from ISO, so it can be purchased from them. NQA don't sell the standard, so you need to get it from an ISO approved organisation or from ISO itself. Identify the sources of legal compliance and other requirements, but a focus there does need to be on legal compliance information because that's a primary objective of the management system. Review any existing hazards and risk assessments that you've got, build on existing requirements where they're already established. Should be pleasantly surprised as you go through this process. There's quite a lot of things, in all probability, certainly within the UK, there'll be a lot of things that are already in existence and a lot of controls and measures and communications that are already built in to how an organisation functions. This is about making health and safety management an integral part of the operations management of the business and a business management system. It's not about we make blue widgets or whatever and then we do a bit of health and safety. It's making occupational health and safety an integral part of where that business operates. And then you can conduct your own gap analysis, looking at the improvement points where you think you can improve on, where there are any gaps, etc. If you're migrating from OHSAS 18001, again, have a copy of ISO 45001 available to you. For existing NQA clients, as I say, we can give you a gap analysis document, but there is a general guidance document available on our website. Conduct your own mapping exercise. One of the challenges that we see when we're going in to do migration assessments is people are aware things go on, but they don't necessarily know where they are in the system. So it can be a very useful exercise for you to look at the clauses and go, actually, yeah, I think we do that over there. Because a lot of this stuff will not have the title OHS or whatever in, it'll just be a normal part of operations. So look where you, and identify where you think it is within the organisation. Conduct some internal audits maybe and confirm that that's doing what you need it to do. It really is important that you understand that OHS management is not a secondary consideration. It needs to be there at the core of the organisation. So just because an organisation is getting busier, it needs to produce more, it needs to have more people working in it, this consideration of risk and opportunity needs to be there right from the start. Because if you address it properly and implement things properly and manage change effectively and look at emergency requirements, etc., etc., it's easier to do that as you're going through that change rather than trying to implement it retrospectively. And this is one of the overall benefits of ISO 45001 is integrating it into your operations and making it a daily operation for that management system. So hopefully that's addressed some of your questions and various things. Like I say, if you have any more questions, if I haven't gone through them as we walk through this presentation this afternoon, question here, there doesn't seem to be requirements for many new documents from reading the standard compare. It's not about just providing documents, so it's about providing evidence and data and using that data effectively. So it's trying to reduce burdens of administration necessarily, but you've got to also consider how would you then evidence that to an assessment team. We can take evidence as verbal evidence, a statement made, etc. A lot of the assessment will be taken up by talking to people, going observing activities and operations. It isn't just about having documents and files of records and data, etc. Some of that data will be live as part of your operational activities, and we can view it as part of that operational activities. So we want to observe the operation and see it actually live working. It's not about creating documents or various things. It's about the effectiveness and the delivery of that benefit as required by the standard. It's not about necessarily creating documents and records unnecessarily. Some document records are required, obviously policies and objectives and various things like that, procedural controls, where you think they need to be documented if they're documented in a particular way, but the standard isn't prescriptive in that. It's a very flexible approach. A question about internal audits. Do we need to cover the requirements of ISO within the audit cycle of 3 years? I very strongly suggest that yes, that is the case, and you also need to be able to demonstrate at migration that the management system has been fully migrated and can be confirmed with various evaluation methods. The standard isn't prescriptive in terms of what's covered and when, but it also encourages a risk-based approach. So yes, there can be flexibility about audit programs and duration of audit programs. Traditionally, a lot of organizations go for an annual audit program, but you can also then apply the risk-based approach so that, you know, if you've never had an issue, etc., with various things, then you may look at that less frequently than you look at something where you've got lots of incidents, lots of accidents, or you've made some big changes to it, to that particular area of activity. Use the internal audit process effectively because it's there to verify that the system is being effectively implemented and it's working. And that's a key element for the management review and the review of the management system overall. And it's a very powerful tool, is internal auditing, for verification. So, you know, don't make it burdensome, but it needs to be effective and it needs to be appropriately applied throughout the organization. So if that's answered, hopefully answered everyone's questions that we've received in today. Thank you all for listening. As I say, for those of you registered, you will get a copy of the slides sent out to you by email, and the recording will be available via our website. Thanks again for listening. Be safe. Have a nice weekend.